All right. Doesn't that song just kind of like take the edge off when you're like about to get started with something like this?
Oh yeah. I was like almost lulled into like not quite asleep, but I was very relaxed. I am very relaxed.
Well, I don't want you to fall asleep, but being relaxed is key. So
no, not asleep. No, but it is. It's very relaxing. I like it.
Cool. Well, welcome everyone. I'm here with Jaclyn Schiff today, CEO of PodReacher. And PodReacher helps turn podcasts and other recordings into high quality blog content. And I'm excited to have a conversation today with Jaclyn just about SEO, about discoverability, about getting more from your podcast. So welcome, Jaclyn. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Grant. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We were just chatting before we got on here, and I've already learned more about live streams and video. So cool. Thanks for that.
Cool. That's good to hear. And definitely a lot of ways that live streamers and writers and bloggers can work together to really pack a punch when it comes to content marketing. That's kind of the strategy I was discussing with you that I'm taking, is to really create an SEO strategy that starts with the live stream and kind of downstream activities like repurposing, like writing, is really where those become discovered and relevant. So that's kind of where we're going to start off the conversation, is just talking about why your podcast or why your show needs an SEO strategy. And maybe if we could just talk a little bit about a bigger conversation about what is discoverability, and what does discoverability mean for your podcast and for your show?
Yeah, I think it's all good questions, Grant, and I appreciate them. Thank you. So, I think there's a lot of things that people could be speaking about when discussing podcast discoverability. The area that we at PodReacher focus on and have expertise in is in, so taking the spoken word, so a recording from your podcast, and turning it into readable, shareable text that can be found via web search. So we're not talking about discoverability in podcast apps. That's a whole separate discussion, and one that is challenging, right? Because there's so many different podcast apps and different ways that they work. But we're talking about making your podcast discoverable. If someone searches in Google for the topic that your podcast is about, your podcast should be on page 1, right? And so we're talking about how do you develop content for your podcast website or the website that hosts your podcasts, so that it will appear more when the people who are interested in your content are searching for it. And what I find really interesting, Grant, is, so obviously like Google's a no-brainer, if, in marketing, like generally when you talk about it in marketing circles, like people get it, like you need to be SEO optimized. But in the podcast community, it's very neglected. People are very focused, for good reason, on wanting to get visibility in podcast apps. But what I like to encourage people to think about is there's a lot of different ways to discover a podcast. Certainly you want to have that covered. You want to be discoverable in podcast apps. You want to have, you want to go on other shows, maybe even consider doing some paid ads on other shows. So you want to be reach people in the channel that you are, which is audio. But there are other ways to make your podcast discoverable too, when you've kind of covered those bases.
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on is that there are a lot of ways to be discovered. Obviously the goal is to be discovered, and SEO is a great way to do that. It's not the only way.
Right.
Our strategy is really focused more on like meeting people on social media through micro video and trying to look at your podcast's long form content as a means of creating short micro content that will really pack a punch and bring awareness to your podcast. But what really excites me in the long term is getting discovered on the 2 largest search engines in the world, which right now are Google and YouTube, right? I think we forget about YouTube sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's cool how, when we're facing a problem now in our everyday lives, maybe we rely a little bit too much on this. I mean, we go to Google, we go to YouTube, and they're solutions oriented for us. We come with a problem and they can help solve that problem. So I think, how can you become more like problem and solution oriented with your content planning so that you end up becoming the person, the podcast people go to when they need their problem solved? Like, how do you think it starts from the beginning to get to there?
Yeah, I think this is, definitely like advanced thinking, right? Certainly where we've edged beyond the 101 level. Because a big way that people are discovered in search, to your point, is people search for something when they need a question answered. And so you want to tailor your content so that it's an answer to the question that a person is asking. So, one kind of, I'm not going to say easy because it's not easy. There's steps, but I think a lot of podcasts try to fit this in after the process. So they come up with ideas for a podcast, and then they make the content, and then they're like, okay, how do we now optimize it for SEO? The kind of discoverability we're talking about and answering the questions of the people who would be searching for you should ideally come in your content planning process. So before you even sit down to record an episode, you should, I don't think the only way to make content is to think about it through the lens of SEO or search. I think there's a lot of reasons to record a podcast episode, and I think it can serve a lot of different purposes. Sometimes you want to create something that, for a business, for example, is more tailored to maybe a question you get asked as part of your buyer's journey, right? So it's not something that people would Google, but when they're having a discussion with you, it comes up a lot. And so, maybe you record a podcast episode that's geared towards answering that prospect's question. So again, lots of different reasons, but if you are thinking about wanting to get your podcast more discovered in search, you want to make that part of your content planning process. So you want to use perhaps a keyword research tool to see what are people already searching for. There's a lot of different ones out there. Ahrefs, Moz, there's tons. They're all really good. But that's just something you want to think about again before you sit down and record the content.
Yeah. I think it's important to work backwards, focus on those questions that your potential customers would be asking, and then go ahead and answer those. I love how to, should I, though I think those are good ways to maybe frame those questions. Are there any other maybe like kickoff phrases that help you maybe get in the thinking of how to ask the right questions, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think also, I was, as you were speaking, I was like, I know for someone who's never used like a keyword research tool or something, I don't know that me like giving the names of some was very helpful, but you don't even have to get that technical. And I think this is kind of the question that you're asking. Yeah. You could think about what are the questions that people ask you, when you have conversations. I mean, from your business, Grant, like what are like one or two of the most common things that come up when you're having a conversation with someone who's interested in your services?
Yeah. I mean, what does it look like to work with you? Will we need to do any additional work, when we create content with you all? Right. How long should I expect results? Why should I implement content repurposing? Yep. Things of that nature.
And those could be great videos, like how long until I see results from my video content or from repurposing content. And that might be not something that people are searching for, but again, is really relevant. to what you're doing. So I would definitely, I think a first place to start is just thinking about the questions that people ask you.
Yeah, I think FAQ questions is a great place to start.
Yeah,
especially if you already have it on your site. It's like it's a great opportunity to expand on those and add to them. So as far as, you're an expert at written text, optimizing for text. And one of the big things that you advocate for is that a transcript is not enough. Blog posts are superior. What are some of the differences between a transcript and a blog post that make them more powerful for the end user and for you getting more reach from your podcast?
Right. Yeah. So it's a good question. So this is like a question that comes up a lot with what we do. And I know I guess some people consider this a little controversial because there are a lot of podcasts that just say, oh, I get a transcription and, so I'm taken care of. My podcast is search optimized. There are a lot of good reasons to have transcript. I'm not saying don't offer it, don't include it. I mean, for just one of the most basic is for people who are hard of hearing and might want an exact record of the conversation. So there's a lot of reason to have a transcript, but it's probably not doing as much for search as I think a lot of people expect that it is. So transcript is a word for word record of the conversation. And there are people who like reading them. I personally don't. I just find it's a lot to get through.
It's too much.
Right. And, I think sometimes if a person's listened to an episode, there's certainly a use case. They might go back and search for a certain part of the transcript. So again, those are useful things. But when we talk about discoverability, a transcript is not written in such a way that it's responding to a question. So going back to what we were just discussing, it's harder for Google or any search engine really to know, okay, what question is this piece of content asking, because it isn't framed that way. It's also, transcripts don't tend to be structured in a way that is SEO friendly. And by that, I mean, you need to have H2 headers on the page, which helps signal to the search engine, what is this about? It helps it categorize it. So there's a lot of technical things that make it, not very search friendly. And, I think my point is I'm just trying to make the case that it's a good thing to have, but if you want new people coming to your podcast via search, you do want to take the recording and turn it into an article that answers a question that is optimized for text, right? And I'll give you a perfect example. Like a lot of podcasts, in the beginning, they'll ask the person to talk about their background. And sometimes they'll spend, 10 minutes of a 30-minute conversation on their career journey and where they've been. And that can be interesting in audio. But when you think about how that would fit in an article, that's going to be 2 sentences. Because when you're reading an article, and let's say it's about the 5 ways to repurpose a video, you want to get into those 5 ways. At the top, you want to know, okay, where does this information come from? Is the person qualified? And again, takes a sentence or 2 to explain that. But so that's kind of the value of having an article that, someone has structured and edited so that it's really geared towards reading versus a transcript, which again is, it's a full record of the conversation.
This makes me think of, so I know you have a background in journalism. It makes me think of basically the predominant format for podcasts now is interview podcasts. Not all of them are like that, but a lot of them are.
Right.
And I'm thinking back to when newspapers were the predominant news source and information source for a lot of us. If you were a journalist and you want to interview someone influential from your community, in order to get information from them, you're going to interview them, right? And you're going to try to get some hot takes from them, maybe. Maybe you get some insights. But the last thing you would ever do is take that transcript from the conversation and just slap it on a newspaper and send it out. That would be the most boring thing you ever read.
Well, people wouldn't pay for that.
People wouldn't pay for it. No, you take snippets from it, you create a piece around it that helps, focus on the meat of the conversation. And so this process that we're talking about right now, like this has been replicated over decades, hundreds of years in journalism. So I'm curious what, maybe what your background in journalism has how it's prepared you for this process that you go through with repurposing podcasts and blog content.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that into the conversation, because it's, I think it's no coincidence that I come from that background. And then, I've built a company around taking interviews and turning them into, blog posts, articles, or whatever it is, because that is 100% like part of the process. And, what I say sometimes when speaking with clients is, and to illustrate the difference between a transcript and an article is, the piece that we would create based on your podcast. It's as if a journalist was there, you were doing this in front of a live studio audience, and it's similar to the article that they would write, based on the discussion. Because that's a part of it. It's listening to the conversation and then writing up the information that is most relevant to the audience. So journalism is absolutely one part of it. I kind of think of there as being two pieces to it. So the first being journalism, which is, I would say, relaying what happened in a conversation. So who was there? What did the two people discuss? But then the other piece, and this is like with the different writers that we work with, I like to say we're looking for unicorns, right? Because we like them to have the journalism, but then there's also the content marketing side, which is, it's different because it is thinking more like a marketer, and it's thinking about positioning. So who's going to be reading this, and how do you kind of make it more appealing? There's so much content out there. To make your content stand out, someone's got to, like, within the first, few seconds of looking at it, they've got to realize this is for me, right? This is answering my question. And so that's something that I don't think journalism always does, because typically journalists are dealing with news. And so you don't have to sell news to people in the same way you sell something that's more evergreen, because people want to know what happened. But so we want to tell people what happened, but we also want to help them see how it's going to help them and how it's going to solve their problem.
I love that. I'll move on to kind of our next topic, which is about video and text, how they can work together. And I kind of bring this conversation up because, my agency, Authentic Marketing, we help podcasters with their video content repurposing. That, again, one way to get discovered, and you're more focused on text. So I just wanted you and I to brainstorm some ideas, maybe how those two mediums can work together to create some synergy, and 1 + 1 = 4. I think that's an interesting discussion for us to have. So I mentioned a few kind of before this conversation, but do you have any ideas about how, or creative ways that we can bring video into blog, as well, and make it work together?
Yeah, I mean, the pages that I like a lot on different websites that people put together is, I personally really like and think it's effective to have a pretty media rich page. So hopefully you are recording video when you record your podcast, right? And I like the idea of having perhaps a whole article based on the discussion. So if someone just wanted to read, they could do that. But then maybe also having video snippets throughout of, sound bites, important moments from the conversation, let's say I wanted to actually hear or see, what it was like when the people were discussing it. I think that could be really cool. The other thing that's interesting to me is, when you have more media on the page, you give people more of an opportunity to interact with your page. and then they're staying on the page longer, hopefully. And that again is a helpful thing as part of, your search ranking, because Google favors websites. There's many things that are part of the algorithm, but Google favors websites that people actually spend some time on the page, because it's an indication that they're getting value from it. So that's kind of where my head goes, but I'm curious about your thoughts.
No, yeah, I totally agree there. Because sometimes if I hit a blog post, I'm like kind of hyped. Sometimes I like to read, sometimes I like to watch. It just depends on the situation. Kind of like if it's the morning time when I've got energy up here in my brain, like I'll probably read. But if it's evening time, like I'm gonna watch. So I always appreciate when I'm on Google, I search for a specific problem or question. I go to a blog post, and then they have short snippet videos that I'm able to watch through. And I also really appreciate it when people on YouTube, I'm not sure if you've noticed this recently, but they add this feature where you can add like chapters to your video, kind of like what we've got at the bottom here with like right now we're circled with video and text, right? You can kind of give your listeners like a journey through the conversation and really save a lot of their time. So I appreciate that so much. And I think that's actually a way that the blog editing process, text editing process, and video can work together is on YouTube actually, and adding like SEO rich content to your YouTube description as well as titles. And what I see a lot of podcasters do and content creators is, I don't think they put much thought into their YouTube titles as far as why would someone get to my video? What would they have to be searching in order for them to find us? So I want to start personally putting more time into that. And I think that's something that it takes a copywriter, it takes a storyteller, it takes an editor, like some time and patience to do well and do right. So, looking at this from the second largest search engine in the world, which is YouTube, if you can kind of combine micro videos and your long form content with really SEO rich descriptions in your YouTube, and then those chapter links and good descriptions, good titles, then I think you really can boost your discoverability. So that's
there is a huge opportunity with what you're speaking about. There was a project that we worked on where ideally, I think one of the things we're kind of hitting on is and we're both in the repurposing business. So I think the larger point we're making is that, you need to have content in different formats, because different people are going to find you in different ways. People have different preferences of how to consume the content. It might even change, to your point, at the time of day. The same person might prefer reading in the morning, watching videos later. So you want to have it in all different formats, but it's a very similar process to create, complementary text for YouTube as it is for a podcast. So another thing we work on is show notes, which, I've become more aware recently that this is like by no means a universal term. But what I mean by that is, basically like a description of what an episode, a YouTube video recording is about. And then something that kind of helps you navigate it. So maybe you include key points, maybe you include timestamps. There was one podcast we were working with, and we did this, and we sort of did it with a YouTube first, mentality. But he could basically use that. Also in podcast apps, also on his website. So there were a lot of different ways to use it. And to your point, I think creating a video, creating a podcast episode is so much work. And then after that, find the time to create something excellent and optimized that's really going to help people, better understand the content, and help them find it. It's a tall order, right? So yeah, it's hard to be, it's hard to stay on top of all these different things.
Yeah. And that's a great transition, and kind of why I think why having outside help repurposing your content can really help so much.
Yes.
Help you not go crazy there's a lot of steps to this process. There's a lot of work you can do. And when you were talking about journalism earlier, you're talking about how like the metaphor of, you're listening to Johnny Carson interview their guest, or whoever may be. I wasn't alive to watch Johnny Carson, but I don't know why he came to my head. He's just a classic example of a great interviewer, right? You have your journalists in the audience, and they're the ones that get to listen, comprehend, and then interpret what the news article would look like the next day. And they're an outside voice. It's not Johnny Carson writing that article himself, because he's just way too darn busy, and that's not the best use of his time, right? He's an entertainer, he's a host, he's an interviewer, not necessarily a writer. So, I'm curious, what do you think are some like side benefits too, other benefits that come along with either hiring someone for your team to help solely with the repurposing process, or like hiring an outside agency like ours to, or yours to help with those parts of the process?
Yeah, I love the analogy. And I think I might steal that, right? Because like, it's ridiculous to imagine, Johnny Carson, or I guess even like, Terry Gross from Fresh Air. I don't think she's writing, the descriptions, based on her interviews. I think, so for a business that might be creating this type of content, with a view to ultimately getting people to discover them, bringing people into their ecosystem so that ultimately they might convert to customers. It's just a huge missed opportunity to not do this, right? Like you're going to the effort of, making a podcast, doing these recordings. We've spoken about how different people just gravitate towards different forms of media. And without someone really paying attention to it, it's hard to get the results. We are in a saturated media ecosystem. People can get, the barrier to entry to make a podcast is low. It's getting lower every day. Anyone can make a YouTube video. And so you really need to have a strategy in place to help you stand out, and to help ensure that people are actually seeing the content. So you've got to, have it optimized for the different channels. You've got to make sure you're distributing it. And, frankly, like I think without having a devoted resource or someone who's, really focused on thinking about this, it's just not going to happen by itself. The other thing is that I think a lot of sometimes, business owners or business leaders do a podcast, and it's valuable for them to have that, networking, face-to-face interaction with whether it be a client or someone else in their industry. So maybe it's for thought leadership purposes. That's valuable, right? Like, I mean, I appreciate now I'm getting the time to discuss this with you, and, we're having this conversation. What's less valuable for that business owner, and they probably like really don't have time for it, is, okay, once they've done the recording, is it worth their time? Thinking again of the Johnny Carson thing, like, there's probably like higher level decisions they need to be making, different strategic things than sitting down to write tweets, write a blog post, write descriptions for a YouTube video and all of that. So I think it's all about, I forget who uses this phrase, but I do love it, working in your zone of genius.
I also think there's an element to it where it's like, if you don't enjoy doing it, then you shouldn't do it. Obviously there's going to be some things in our business that are important that you've got to do that are going to feel like doing your taxes. Not always fun, right? That's why you hire a CPA. Similarly, like repurposing the process, super important. Not necessarily though something you might enjoy, and not necessarily something that's probably the highest and best use of your times, but it's so important. And I'm a big proponent of whether you have someone in your team who's doing it, or an outside organization, they should fully be focusing on the repurposing process, and that's all you should give them. Don't distract them with other event marketing or other product launches or other website design. Like their job, their role is get more from the content that we're already doing, And I think that leads to a lot of good results. So, I want to be respectful of your time. We've got a few more minutes. Let's just hit on like the long tail a little bit, in the long-term opportunities that can come from having the right strategy in place and having a plan and sticking to it. I think the biggest disaster and maybe fear of content creators is that they create content, they put all this time into it, and maybe you post it on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and the half-life of it, like people actually getting to consume it and seeing it, is only a few hours or maybe a few days. Like, how do we create content that lasts for years? That's kind of my question.
Yeah.
That people will always keep coming back to. That's what I think we all really want, right? Easier said than done.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a big question, and I think I want to like prevent myself from going too philosophical about it, because I think it really kind of.
I like that. I like the philosophical angle, honestly.
Well, I think it starts, with your content planning, and I think it's hard to accidentally create the kind of content you're talking about, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I think there was a post on a blog. I don't know if you read this blog, Wait But Why. Do you know that blog? Anyways,
I do not.
I think the post is from 2014, and I can't tell you how many times I've like sent it to different people. It's a blog post about the different types of friendship we have over our lifetime, right? So the point is that the stuff like that doesn't happen by accident. So I think it really starts with understanding very deeply who you're trying to reach, what really matters to them, and what's going to move the needle for them. So that's like at the highest level. I think those are you have to like nail those questions. Then, I think the other stuff in terms of the tactics, the strategy to distribute, redistribute, make sure it is easily findable for people. I think it's so, you kind of owe it to yourself. If you put that much effort into your content creation and you really understand who this is for and you're really adding value with it, you kind of owe it to yourself to do all these other things that we're talking about. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Grant, but that's like my very top level view.
I like your philosophical take on it, and that you have to know your audience, know what they would find value in, and focus your time there. The way I like to look at this is a good question, is like, you want to create content so good that they would come back and listen to it again. And not only do they have to find it the first time, but they also have to listen to it, watch it, and say, wow, that was so helpful. Like, this is a resource.
Right.
And then 6 months down the road, when it's time for them to execute on this strategy, or for it's time to finally make that special meatloaf that they've been wanting to make, whatever it may be, they can find you again. And that's where the discoverability and SEO comes in, and planning it correctly, having a home for your content, whether it's blog or YouTube. So not only being found once, being found twice, and creating content that's so good that people will come back to, I think is really important. So, yeah.
But let me ask you, like,
yeah,
I'm always curious about this, and it just,
sure.
I like getting people's takes on this. What do you think makes someone, when they hear something and they're like, okay, I've got to come back and listen to that again? What is behind that?
Well, do you have a few minutes? I know you said you had a hard stop at 10:35. So do I have time to answer this? Oh,
okay. Yes. Yeah.
How about this?
Let's just run with it.
Okay. I run with it. So I think it has to be relevant to them, and it has to feel like the person was speaking directly to you, whereas like you were with them in the room and they were like, hey, Grant, I know you've been having this issue with your disc golf game, and you've been throwing incorrectly, and it's been causing you to pull it right, and now you're making bogeys. You're not playing well. You're losing out on money. Like, if they're able to speak to you in a way that perfectly hits on the problem that you're facing, I think that's even sometimes more important than the solutions that they're offering, is that they understand they understand your specific problem. So when I read a blog post and the first few sentences, I'm like, yes, that is the experience. That is the difficulty I'm experiencing. Then I may not even get to the solutions. What I might do is I might bookmark that post and then come back to it later, because I know that's when I'll have time to read it. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Okay. No, we are on the same page with this. I mean, that's all I was going to say is I think like it sounds simple. It's really hard to do, but like your point of having people identify very deeply with the content. And I know like a lot of businesses, a lot of marketers sometimes feel uneasy about, niching down and being like really focused. Like, so are you a marketing agency, for like if you only really want to work with people in the cannabis industry, like say that and be as crystal clear, because then if that is me, right, and like I'm a cannabis entrepreneur or something and I see your content, I'm like, this is very different from all the other marketing agencies that don't just work with people in my industry. And it's very powerful. So
yeah, I totally agree. You got to speak. Imagine you're in the room with them and you're speaking directly to them. But all right, I want to wrap this up. Can you just tell us where to find out more about PodReacher and how people can work with you essentially?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Well, this was really fun. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for running a tight live stream. People should feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, my personal profile, Jaclyn Schiff. Otherwise, go to podreacher.com, and that's the best way to learn more.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jaclyn, and we'll definitely keep building a relationship, stay in touch, and looking forward to it. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Grant.